Welcome back. Okay, so we're going to continue with our nonfiction unit here, and we're going to dive back into this book, Zombie Makers, that we started reading the other day. Okay, so last time we were here, we oriented ourselves with the text, so we looked at the cover, kind of read a little bit to figure out what it's about and see how it helped us figuring it out. So we're going to continue building on this work that we did. This time we're going to focus on something that is always an area of struggle, and that is main idea. So we know main idea is definitely one of the things we want to focus on in nonfiction, right? It's one of the things that's super important for us to consider. Main idea is complex, and the more challenging a book is, the more complex the main idea is. In those books that you guys probably read in like second or third grade, the first sentence probably had the main idea, what the whole text is teaching about. Well, these books, you guessed it, not so much. So what we're going to do today is we're going to dive back into our book, Zombie Makers, but this time we're going to pay attention to this idea of main idea, specifically what makes this complex in these nonfiction books. So that's what we're going to explore today. Now, you might be thinking, well, I know main idea. I've used it before. I'm pretty good at it. Well, that might have worked for those previous books, but you can't expect that same mentality work to apply to these more complex ones. So we're going to study a couple of pages of our book here, paying attention to what we notice about main idea, what makes it a little bit challenging, and see if we can make a list together. Okay, so just to kind of review, we read the introduction. We started to read that first chapter the other day, all about the flies and how the fungus attaches to the flies. So this time, we're going to continue on with that section. So it's the same chapter, which means it's still about a fungus that takes over something else. So I'm going to go ahead and keep reading here. Now, I'm assuming it's a different section. I see already some different pictures, so I'm guessing this is another animal or creature that the fungus kind of takes over. So as we're reading, we're going to pay attention to what we're noticing about this text that kind of helps us determine what makes main idea complex, so we know how to tackle that problem later. Okay, so body snatcher invasion. Carpenter ants live in the rainforest of Southeast Asia. The ant builds the nest in treetops, high above the ground. They hunt for food among the branches. Sometimes the search for food takes carpenter ants down to the forest floor. It can be a dangerous trip. I'm going to pronounce this as it's spelled. Okay. Ophiocordsepunalateralis. That's a long name. Lurks near the ground. O. unilateralis is another zombie-making fungus. Carpenter ants are its host. Okay, so we have a different fungus this time, but this, and also a different host. So we have a new fungus, we have a new host, but maybe it seems like it is the same thing. Kind of skip ahead, like E. muscae, O. unilateralis begins its life cycle as a spore. A spore that lands on a carpenter ant quickly sprouts. The fungus invades the ant's body. It digests the ant's insides bit by bit. The infected ant is back at the ant nest by the time the fungus takes over its brain. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and stop there real quick. So we were introduced to a new fungus. We were introduced to a new host. We can see here we have some pictures. So we have this carpenter ant. So if you guys don't know what that is, here's a picture of an ant here venturing down the forest floor. So it seems like we have our new zombie maker, our new fungus, as well as the nickname we're going to call him the body snatcher. Its victim is carpenter ant. It's in Southeast Asia. So it's a different location, but it seems like it's doing the same thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep reading on, paying attention to what we're noticing about main idea, about the text itself. So let's go ahead and keep reading. But the nest is up in the treetops where it's hot and dry. To grow well and produce O. unilateralis needs a place that is cool, shady, and damp. O. unilateralis releases chemicals that affect the brain and its host. The infected ant starts to behave strangely. It twitches and stumbles again and again. Sooner or later, the ant loses its grip and falls off the tree. Down on the ground, the ant continues twitching and stumbling. It cries, climbing back up the tree, but falls before it gets very high. The ant ends up clambering through low-growing plants on the forest floor. It moves in and out of the leaves as if searching for something. The ant isn't actually searching, though. The fungus is. It's looking for just the right place to grow, like a driver in a car, scouting out the perfect parking spot. Eventually, the fungus makes the zombie ant stop on the underside of a leaf where it's cool, shady, and damp. The ants obey one final command from its master. The ant opens its jaws and bites into the leaf. Then it dies. But its jaw stays clamped. anchoring it securely in place. The fungus keeps growing inside the ant's corpse. Several days later, a long, skinny stalk erupts through the dead ant's head. After a few weeks, part of the stalk swells as spores inside develop. Ripe spores shower down into the forest floor. Carpenter ants that walk into the spore-infested area are likely to become infected with O. unilateralis, and so the zombie-making cycle will begin again. Okay, so let's jot down a couple of things about main idea that we are noticing. So something I think that's super important to kind of jot down, we're making a chart here, ways nonfiction becomes complex, is that sometimes the headings and subheadings don't help or they are misleading. Now in this case, we have a subheading here of body snatcher invasion, which actually makes sense to what this text is about, because we know that the fungus comes in and snatches the body and invades on this body. So that actually makes sense. But I've actually read a little bit more into this book, and that's not always the case. So sometimes it's clear cut, other times it's not, though. So we have to be a little mindful of this. Something else too, there are several main ideas. So there's not just going to be one answer to what the text is teaching. Now, you can do this multiple ways. You can read a chapter, stop, jot down main idea. You can read a couple of sections, stop, jot down main idea. But the important thing is we need to make sure that we know this. There are several main ideas. There's lots and lots of different things that the author or the text is trying to teach us. So it's okay if we have different ideas, several ideas. That's a good thing. That means that we're paying attention to that. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep reading, finish this last section here to see what else we're noticing about main idea. And then we're going to actually tackle main idea to see what we come up with. Scientists David Hughes from Penn State University and Sandra Anderson from the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, study O. unilateralis infected carpenter ants in Thailand's jungles. They discovered that affected ants are almost always about 10 inches above the forest floor when they bite down on leaves. The air just above the ground is very damp, with about 95% humidity. The location is also fairly cool compared to the treetops, with a temperature between 68 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit. These conditions are just what O. unilateralis needs to grow well and produce spores. The fungus is a puppet master pulling the strings of the poor infected ants, making them travel a long way during the last hours of their life, so eventually die where the parasite prefers to be, said Hughes. When the scientists examined infected carpenter ants under a microscope, they discovered that O. unilateralis does something else quite amazing. The fungus changes the ant's jaw muscle in a way that actually makes them more powerful than the ant when the ant bites into the leaf. And the ant's jaws remain locked even after it dies. These changes help make sure that the ant's corpse and the fungus inside of it won't fall off the leaf before spores are released. Okay, so that's the end of that first chapter section. So if we kind of go back to our chart here, so we said headings some days might not help. There are several main ideas. I think something else too that's kind of important to note about central and main idea is that they're implicit or they're hidden. So unlike those really simple nonfiction books you guys have read in the past, where it's just the first sentence, you guys will not find that here. You might on a rare occasion, but most of the time you're going to have to think about what the text is really about, piece those things together to come up with our main idea. So we're going to do that now together. This is the work that you guys will kind of do on your own later on. So I thought it might be helpful if we kind of do it together here. Okay, so we know main idea is what the text is teaching about a topic. So it helps to think about what topic is being discussed in this book. So I'm going to choose to create a main idea based on the two sections that we read together together in this book so far. So the chapter was about fungus. The first section was about ants. The first was about flies. The second was about ants. So I want to think about what the author or the text is trying to teach me about those two things. Well, if we think about what those two things had in common, they had some kind of fungus that was taking over their body. Well, I thought about, okay, well, what about the fungus is it trying to teach us? I mean, there's lots of unusual things. So something that really stands out to me is I'm wondering if the text is trying to teach us that fungus, certain kinds of fungus, need the bodies of other creatures to survive. So they talked about that quite a bit, actually. There's certain things that these fungus do in order to repeat the life cycle. So if I think about, okay, well, what detail proves this idea? Well, I had 2 details. There are 2 sections in this chapter. So I might jot down a little information about each one. So section 1 was about the fly. So we can say, like, the fungus uses the fly to get food, energy, to grow spores, and reproduce. So it does need these things to eat, get energy in order to reproduce or create more. We think about the second detail could be, well, the second section was about ants, and how does the fungus use ants to survive? Well, they use the ants to search for places to grow. So they make them travel lots of different ways or travel pretty far. They plant sprouts, and then that helps them repeat the life cycle. So we can see here, okay, well, something the text is trying to teach us in these 2 sections together is that these fungus need these creatures to survive. They need their bodies. And how do they need their bodies? Well, they need it this way and need it that way. So that's main idea. And again, when you're thinking about main idea, there's a couple of ways that you guys can do main idea to jot about it. So the first one, which might be easier for you guys, is to do 1 chapter at a time. So basically, after reading the first chapter, which is what we just did here, you then stop and think about what the main idea is. Or if there's like a couple paragraphs, a couple sections you guys need to read to come up with the idea, that's fine too. But I often find 1 chapter at a time is pretty easy for me. Or not easy, I want to say easy, but in terms of main idea, it's a little bit better to manage for me. Okay, so to recap what we did, so we kind of first talked about the ways that nonfiction books become complex. So we know that the headings and subheadings don't help sometimes or are misleading. So don't rely on those headings to help you figure out main idea. There are several main ideas. There are lots of different main ideas we could have come up with in this section. So that was just one example. And they are hidden or they are implicit. So we have to find them. We then thought about what the text was teaching us to think about main idea, and then we also thought about details to support that main idea. So as you guys go off and read today, you are going to do the same work. You are going to continue reading your nonfiction book, and as you're reading or when you stop to read, you too are going to think about what main idea the text is teaching. So go ahead and go off and read and see what you guys come up with.